Section 4 of The Story of the Trapper by Agnes Christina Laut. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ted Leinhardt. Chapter 4. The Ancient Hudson's Bay Company Wakens Up. Those 80 Astorians and Nor'westers who set inland with their 10 canoes and boats under protection of 2 swivels encountered as many dangers on the long trip across the continent as they had left at Fort George. Following the wandering course of the Columbia, the traders soon passed the international boundary northward into the Arrow Lakes with their towering skyline of rampant walls onto the great bend of the Columbia, where the river becomes a tumultuous torrent milky with glacial sediment, now raving through a narrow canyon, now teased into a white whirlpool by obstructing rocks, now tumbling through vast shadowy forests, now foaming round the green icy masses of some great glacier, and always mountain-girt by the tent-like peaks of the eternal snows. A plain, unvarnished tale, my dear Bellefieux, wrote the mighty MacDonald of Garth in his 86th year for his son, but the old trader's tale needed no varnish of rhetoric. Nearing the mountains we got scarce of provisions, bought horses for beef. Here, at the Great Bend, we left canoes and began a mountain pass, Yellowhead Pass. The river meanders much, and we cut across, holding by one another's hands, wading to the hips in water, dashing in, frozen at one point, thawed at the next, frozen before we dashed in, our men carrying blankets and provisions on their heads. 4 days hard work before we got to Jasper House at the source of the Athabasca, sometimes camping on snow 20 feet deep, so that the fires we made in the evening were 15 or 20 feet below us in the morning." End quote. They had now crossed the mountains, and taking to canoes again, paddled downstream to the portage between Athabasca River and the Saskatchewan. Tramping 60 miles, they reached Fort Augustus, Edmonton, on the Saskatchewan, where canoes were made on the spot, and the voyageurs launched downstream a trifling distance of 2,000 miles by the windings of the river, past Lake Winnipeg, southward to Fort William, the Nor'westers' headquarters on Lake Superior. Here the capture of Astoria was reported, and bales to the value of $1 million in modern money sent east in 50 canoes with an armed guard of 300 men. Coasting along the north shore of Lake Superior, the voyageurs came to the Sault and found Mr. Johnston's establishment a scene of smoking ruins. It was necessary to use the greatest caution not to attract the notice of warring parties on the lakes. Overhauling a canoe going eastward, a Mackinaw trader and 4 Indians with a dozen fresh American scalps, writes MacDonald, showing to what a pass things had come. 2 days later, a couple of boats were overtaken and compelled to halt by a shot from MacDonald's swivels. The strangers proved to be the escaping crew of a British ship which had been captured by 2 American schooners, and the British officer bore bad news. The American schooners were now on the lookout for the rich prize of furs being taken east in the northwest canoes. Slipping under the nose of these schooners in the dark, the officer hurried to Mackinaw, leaving the Nor'westers hidden in the mouth of French River. William Mackay, a Nor'west partner, at once sallied out to the defense of the furs. Determined to catch the brigade, one schooner was hovering about the Sault, the other cruising into the countless recesses of the north shore. Against the latter, the Mackinaw traders directed their forces, boarding her, and as MacDonald tells with brutal frankness, pinning the crew with fixed bayonets to the deck. Lying snugly at anchor, the victors awaited the coming of the other unsuspecting schooner, let her cast anchor, bore down upon her, poured in a broadside, and took both schooners to Mackinaw. Freed from all apprehension of capture, the Northwest Brigade proceeded eastward to the Ottawa River, and without further adventure came to Montreal, where all was wild confusion from another cause. At the very time when war endangered the entire route of the Nor'westers from Montreal to the Pacific, the Hudson's Bay Company awakened from its long sleep. While Mr. Astor was pushing his schemes in the United States, Lord Selkirk was formulating plans for the control of all Canada's fur trade. Like Mr. Astor, he too had been the guest at the Northwest banquets in the Beaver Club, Montreal, and had heard fabulous things from those magnates of the North about wealth made in the fur trade. Returning to England, Lord Selkirk bought up enough stock of the Hudson's Bay Company to give him full control, and secured from the shareholders an enormous grant of land surrounding the mouths of the Red and Assiniboine rivers. Where the Assiniboine joins the northern Red were situated Fort Douglas, later Fort Garry, now Winnipeg, the headquarters of the Hudson's Bay Company, and Fort Gibraltar, the northwest post whence supplies were sent all the way from the Mandans on the Missouri to the Eskimo in the Arctics. Not satisfied with this coup, Lord Selkirk engaged Colin Robertson, an old Nor'wester, to gather a brigade of voyageurs 200 strong at Montreal and proceed up the Nor'westers' route to Athabasca, Mackenzie River, and the Rockies. This was the noisy, blustering, bragging company of gaily bedizened fellows that had turned the streets of Montreal into a roistering booth when the Astorians came to the end of their long eastward journey. Poor, fool-happy revelers, 18 of them died of starvation in the far, cold north, owing to the conflict between Fort Douglas and Gibraltar, which delayed supplies. Beginning in 1811, Lord Selkirk poured a stream of colonists to his newly acquired territory by way of Churchill and York Factory on Hudson Bay. These people were given lands, and in return expected to defend the Hudson's Bay Company from Nor'westers. The Nor'westers struck back by discouraging the colonists, shipping them free out of the country, and getting possession of their arms. Miles Macdonell, formerly of the King's Royal Regiment, New York, governor of the Hudson's Bay Company at Fort Douglas, at once issued proclamations forbidding Indians to trade furs with Nor'westers and ordering Nor'westers from the country. On the strength of these proclamations, 2 or 3 outlying Northwest forts were destroyed and Northwest fur brigades rifled. Duncan Cameron, the Northwest partner at Fort Gibraltar, countered by letting his Bois Brûlés, a ragged half-breed army of wild plain rangers under Cuthbert Grant, canter across the 2 miles that separated the rival forts and pour a volley of musketry into the Hudson Bay houses. To save the post for the Hudson's Bay Company, Miles Macdonell gave himself up and was shipped out of the country. But the Hudson's Bay fort was only biding its time till the valiant Northwest defenders had scattered to their winter posts. Then an armed party seized Duncan Cameron not far from the Northwest fort, and with pistol cocked by one man, publicly horsewhipped the Nor'wester. Afterward, when Semple, the new Hudson's Bay governor, was absent from Fort Douglas and could not therefore be held responsible for consequences, the Hudson's Bay men, led by the same Colin Robertson who had brought the large brigade from Montreal, marched across the prairie to Fort Gibraltar, captured Mr. Cameron, plundered all the Nor'westers' stores, and burned the fort to the ground. By way of retaliation for Macdonell's expulsion, the Northwest partner was shipped down to Hudson Bay, where he might as well have been on Devil's Island for all the chance of escape. One company at fault as often as the other, similar outrages were perpetrated in all parts of the North Fur Country, the blood of rival traders being spilt without a qualm of conscience or thought of results. The effect of this conflict among white men on the bloodthirsty redskins one may guess. The Bois Brûlés were clamoring for Cuthbert Grant's permission to wipe the English, meaning the Hudson's Bay men, off the earth, and the swampy Crees and Saulteaux under Chief Peggy were urging Governor Semple to let them defend the Hudson's Bay, meaning kill the Nor'westers. The crisis followed sharp on the destruction of Fort Gibraltar. That post had sent all supplies to northwest forts. If Fort Douglas of the Hudson's Bay Company, past which northwest canoes must paddle to turn westward to the plains, should intercept the incoming brigade of Nor'westers' supplies, what would become of the 2,000 Northwest traders and voyageurs and engagés inland? Whether the Hudson's Bay had such intentions or not, the Nor'westers were determined to prevent the possibility. Like the Red Cross that called ancient clans to arms, scouts went scouring across the plains to rally the Bois Brûlés from Portage la Prairie and Souris and Qu'Appelle. Led by Cuthbert Grant, they skirted north of the Hudson's Bay post to meet and disembark supplies above Fort Douglas. It was but natural for the settlers to mistake this armed cavalcade, red with paint and chanting war songs, for hostiles. Rushing to Fort Douglas, the settlers gave the alarm. Ordering a field piece to follow, Governor Semple marched out with a little army of 28 Hudson's Bay men. The Nor'westers thought that he meant to obstruct their way till his other forces had captured their coming canoes. The Hudson's Bay thought that Cuthbert Grant meant to attack the Selkirk settlers. It was in the evening of June 19, 1816. The two parties met at the edge of a swamp beside a cluster of trees, since called Seven Oaks. Nor'westers say that Governor Semple caught the bridle of their scout and tried to throw him from his horse. The Hudson's Bay say that the governor had no sooner got within range than the half-breed scout leaped down and fired from the shelter of his horse, breaking Semple's thigh. It is well known how the first blood of battle has the same effect on all men of whatever race. The human is eclipsed by that brute savagery which comes down from ages when man was a creature of prey. In a trice, 21 of the Hudson's Bay men lay dead. While Grant had turned to obtain carriers to bear the wounded governor off the field, poor Semple was brutally murdered by one of the Deschamps family, who ran from body to body, perpetrating the crimes of ghouls. It was in vain for Grant to expostulate. The wild blood of a savage race had been roused. The soft velvet night of the summer prairie, with the winds crooning the sad monotone of a limitless sea, closed over a scene of savages drunk with slaughter, of men gone mad with the madness of murder, of warriors thinking to gain courage by drinking the blood of the slain. Grant saved the settlers' lives by sending them downstream to Lake Winnipeg, where dwelt the friendly Chief Pegee. On the river, they met the indomitable Miles MacDonell, posting back to resume authority. He brought news that must have been good cheer. Moved by the expelled governor's account of disorders, Lord Selkirk was hastening north, armed with the authority of a justice of the peace, escorted by soldiers in full regalia, as became his station, with cannon mounted on his barges and stores of munition that ill agreed with the professions of a peaceful justice. The time is gone past for quibbling as to the Earl's motives in pushing north armed like a lord of war. MacDonell hastened back and met him with his army of De Meuron at the Sault. In August, Lord Selkirk appeared before Port William with uniformed soldiers in 11 boats. The justice of the peace set his soldiers digging trenches opposite the Nor'westers' fort. As for the Nor'westers, they had had enough of blood. They capitulated without one blow. Selkirk took full possession. 6 months later, 1817, when ice had closed the rivers, he sent Captain d'Orsonnens overland westward to Red River, where Fort Douglas was captured back one stormy winter night by the soldiers scaling the fort walls during a heavy snowfall. The conflict had been just as ruthless on the Saskatchewan. Nor'westers were captured as they disembarked to pass Grand Rapids and shipped down to York Factory, where Franklin the explorer saw 4 Nor'westers maltreated. One of them was the same John George McTavish who had helped to capture Astoria. Another, Frobisher, a partner, was ultimately done to death by the abuse. The Deschamps murderers of Seven Oaks fled south, where their crimes brought terrible vengeance from American traders. Victorious all along the line, the Hudson's Bay Company were in a curious quandary. Suits enough were pressing in the courts to ruin both companies, and for the most natural reason in the world, neither Hudson Bay nor Nor'Wester could afford to have the truth told and the crimes probed. There was only one way out of the dilemma. In March 1821, the companies amalgamated under the old title of Hudson's Bay. In April 1822, a new fort was built halfway between the sites of Gibraltar and Fort Douglas and given the new name of Fort Garry by Sir George Simpson, the governor, to remove all feeling of resentment. The 1,000 men thrown out of employment by the Union at once crossed the line and enlisted with American traders. The Hudson's Bay was now strong with a strength that comes from victorious conflict, so strong indeed that it not only held the Canadian field, but in spite of the American law forbidding British traders in the United States, reached as far south as Utah and the Missouri, where it once more had a sharp brush with lusty rivals. End section 4.